This happened a few years ago to me when I was still living in my childhood home down in California. I had just inherited my family home, so my cousin decided to move in with my husband and I while she was attending a college nearby. My cousin and I were both working at the Lego store at the time, but I only worked mornings and my husband and cousin worked nights, so there were many nights where I was all alone. A couple of weeks before this happened, I'd been taking stuff out to my car when I realized a strange brown van with no back windows was parked across the street. As I put the stuff in the trunk, the man in the van started making these weird noises at me. I turned to see if I could get a look at his face, but his black Giants baseball cap was pulled down really far. Thinking he was just another creepy guy, I flipped him off and went back into my house. About 2 hours later, I went outside to go somewhere. He was still parked across the street. Not thinking anything of it at the time, I hopped in my car and headed towards my friend's house. As I was driving, I looked in my rearview mirror, and I now saw that brown van following me. I turned down a whole bunch of streets. He followed me down every single one of them. I turned onto the road that my father-in-law lived on and parked, thinking if the guy tried anything, I could just run in there and be safe. When I pulled over in front of my father-in-law's house, the van slowly drove by. I looked into the van, and the man put his hand into a gun position and pointed at me, and then said bang really loudly. After that, he just hauled ass and drove off. Now, I'd always been a little leery of staying home alone. My house had always given me the creeps because of how poorly lit it was. When I was home alone at night, I usually just stayed in the kitchen because of how bright it was. I was watching a TV show on my computer when all of a sudden I hear a banging on the front door, and the hand began to jiggle. It startled me for a moment until I looked at the time, and saw it was around 10 p.m. I knew my cousin was going to be coming home from work about that time, so I got up and opened up the door. But there was nobody on the porch. I shouted my cousin's name, but no response came. I called his cell, and immediately she was like, "Oh, hey, I'm on my way home from work right now." Before I could say anything else, there was 3 extremely loud bangs on the door that connected the kitchen and the garage, and the knob began to shake violently. I slammed the front door closed, locked and chained it, and then ran for my room. My aunt called me while my cousin called the police, and I stayed under the blanket until my cousin arrived home. When she came and got me, I was led outside to talk to the police. I was trying to explain what had happened, but the officers along the side of my house were distracting me. I walked over to where they were, and one of the police officers held me back. They opened the gate, and I saw the door to my garage, which we always leave locked, was now wide open. All of the officers in the area pulled out their guns and went inside, but there was nobody in there. Afterwards, the police told me it was probably just some kids messing around, but if I ever get scared at home, just call them, they'll send someone out. About a week later, I was watching something in my living room with my cousin and my husband. As I was passing by the window next to my front door, I realized there was the same guy wearing that same baseball cap, standing outside on the sidewalk, just staring at our house. When he noticed me watching, he immediately locked eyes with me, slowly gave me the creepiest smile I'd ever seen. I turned and yelled for my husband to go out there, but when I turned back, he was gone. I will say though that the baseball cap in question is really generic. A lot of Giants fans wear it, so I can't really say it was the same exact guy, but it just felt like it was. 3 days after that, I was home alone again. I was on edge, but I was trying to ignore it, telling myself it was all going to be okay. I was baking cookies in the kitchen when I thought I heard a knock at my sliding glass door. My whole body tensed up. I slowly turned towards the door. The lights in the backyard were off and the kitchen ones were on, so the glare on the window made it impossible to see someone standing outside. Everything was silent for a few seconds before someone banged on the door again. I screamed, but felt paralyzed in fear. The person ran on the deck from the sliding glass door to the 2 windows in the living room, and then started banging on them as well. Then came back to the sliding glass door to knock, and started trying to open the door. Finally, I came to my senses, grabbed my keys, and ran outside to my car. I locked myself in it and dialed 911. We sold our house shortly after that. I still have a hard time staying home alone, even though I'm 2 states away now.
A few years ago, my partner and I moved from the East Coast to the Pacific Northwest. We didn't know anyone in the city. We just saved up a decent chunk of money and hopped on a plane. It was exciting, and we certainly haven't regretted it. The plan was to stay at hostels and cheap hotels until we could find work in an apartment. Finding work was actually quite easy for us. We had new jobs within a week of getting off the plane. Finding somewhere to live, though, was a nightmare. Everywhere we looked had incredibly steep requirements for credit scores and minimum household income. We tried more legitimate sites at first, but after 2 months of hopping around to different hostels and motels, we became desperate, so we decided to try Airbnb. Many of the listings we tried gave us just as much trouble at first. So one day, I'm desperately scouring Airbnb for temporary rooms, and I come across one that seemed a little weird. The poster said that he had a very large house in a nice neighborhood, and that he wanted to rent out a 500 square foot room for $600, and that he would be willing to let us stay there for an entire month, utilities included. In this city, that was suspiciously cheap. He also wrote it in a rambling sort of way. It was almost half an ad for a room, and half an open letter to everyone that had recently accused him of being creepy. Now obviously, if we weren't so desperate, we wouldn't have even considered contacting this man. But we thought that we might have been at risk for running out of money before we could get in somewhere at this rate, so we gave him a call. On the phone, he sounded relatively normal. He actually suggested that we meet up with him in a public place to talk about the room first. We agreed to meet him at a restaurant near the hostel we were staying at, though we didn't tell him which one, of course. He showed up late and looked surprised to actually see us there. He sat down and talked for a long time. I say he talked, rather than we talked, because he rambled non-stop about himself and how he felt persecuted by everyone in the city. He claimed to be an artist and a collector. In between him repeating himself many times about how the locals just don't understand his passions, he also told us the room he had advertised was currently filled with his collection. He never once said what he had collected, and that if things went well, he would have to hire people to move it into storage before we could move in. And at one point he stopped talking abruptly and ran to the restroom. We took this opportunity to discuss the situation. We knew at this point that he was probably a crazy person, but the threat of homelessness was looming, so we agreed that we should at least see the place and decide based on that. He came back to the table sweaty and flustered. We weren't sure why at the time, but we figured it out later. Before we could say anything, he blurted out, "I want to show you the apartment right now." We were surprised by this, but we had just discussed seeing it, so we agreed. I asked him to text me the address and that we would take public transportation to meet him there. He insisted that he drive us there since we didn't have a car. Now, we were obviously hesitant to get in his truck. It was obvious even to him, I think. But the previously mentioned desperation was still a thing, and we were pretty sure he wasn't going to try to hurt us. We were right, but it was still a bad decision in retrospect. So we crammed into the front seat of his tiny, rusty, ancient-looking pickup truck. My partner was pressed up against the door, and I was uncomfortably close to the driver as he continued his babble about how this city had gone downhill, and how everyone he used to hang out with shuns him these days. At one point I whispered to my partner to get ready for a possible tuck-and-roll situation. He saw me whispering, but couldn't hear me over the wind roaring through the cab of the truck. One of the windows was broken out, really added to the vehicle's charms, and he said something about how we were romantic together, and that he envied our youth. We arrived at his house minutes after. He had been technically honest up to this point. His neighborhood was decent-looking, and his home was a pretty large one-story ranch house. I noted out loud that he had bars on all of his windows and several locks on his front door. He said that his collection was very valuable to him, and that he was just protecting it from thieves. Once he let us in, I made a point of urging him ahead so that he couldn't get a chance to lock the door behind us. We very quickly noticed 3 things: his art, his collection, and the smell. This man's method of art, of which he was very proud, was apparently to take lots of innocent childlike things, baby dolls, stuffed animals, ceramic figurines, children's toys, and attach dildos to them. One of the most notable pieces being the one he referred to as his unicorn. It was a ceramic horse figurine that he sloppily sawed the head off of and replaced with a baby doll's head and added a hand-sculpted clay penis as the horn. His collection consisted mainly of rubber, plastic, and latex clothing and gas masks. Both his collection and his art was everywhere. The place was so jam-packed with junk that every room had only a single-file path going through it that you could walk without bumping into art or stepping on piles of fetish wear. This fellow was definitely not concerned about cleanliness. This place reeked of mildew and moldy rubber. The carpet looked as if it hadn't seen a vacuum since the 70s. As we passed through the kitchen, he declared that he loves cast iron pans because you don't have to wash them, just as we noticed that every countertop was cluttered with rusted pans that all looked to have decades' worth of scorched food caked on. We stayed behind him, mostly silent as he stopped every now and then to point out his favorite art pieces and repeatedly tell us he was leading us to the room and that it was full of his favorite stuff right now, but that he'd get people to move it out for us. He said that like us moving in was a sure thing. He opened the door to the room and actually said, "Voila." I don't doubt that the room was around 500 square feet, but every inch of it was stuffed with clothing racks. The clothing racks were all packed with the same thing: shiny rubber, latex, and plastic pairs of pants with dildos sewn to the front of them. Up to this point, we were doing our best to avoid reacting to all the freaky stuff in this guy's home, because we were afraid he would snap on us if we did. But I started to notice after a while, though, that he was getting disappointed that we weren't reacting to anything. My guess is that he gets off on shocking people with his creepy pants, and that this wasn't going as well as he had hoped. We told him that the room looked big enough and that we'd like to go back to our hotel and think it over. He didn't have much of a reaction to that, but he agreed to drive us home. When he thought I wasn't looking, he took something out of his pocket and tossed it through the open doorway of a dark room on his way past it. I was afraid that it might have been his car keys, so I used the light of my phone to peek in as we passed that room. The whole room was a pile of tied-off used condoms, or sperm balloons as my partner called them later. We later speculated that he was masturbating at the restaurant and added a balloon to the pile before taking us back. So we piled into his truck and had a long, awkward drive back to the place we had met. His rambling was much more frustrated this time around, and he passed where we wanted to get out 3 times before we just jumped out at a red light, frantically shouting, "This is good, thanks so much, good to meet you, okay, bye." I added his number to my contacts as Mr. Creepy Pants. Over the next several days, he sent a few texts asking if we'd talked it over yet. I wanted to be polite, so I just said, "We've decided against it, but thank you for the very nice offer." He responded with the phrase, "Are you creeped yet?" Copied and pasted over and over about 30 times. I'm not sure why I was still trying to be polite, but when he stopped spamming me, I responded, "No, we thought that your collection was lovely, but it's just so large that we can't bring ourselves to ask you to move it." It took him a few more days to respond, but he did, and he took it better than I expected. "Yeah, I really didn't want to move it. Thanks for understanding." He then made a recommendation for a local burger place for some reason. I blocked his number shortly after that, just to be safe.
I'm retired now, but I worked as an inspector for both private companies and the county throughout my career. I was asked by a private home builder to inspect a house halfway through its construction, and then they would submit my inspection to the county. I get inside and start doing my job, wandering around with a clipboard and a flashlight. It's pretty routine, up until I get to the back end of the house. I can hear something. There seems to be trash scattered in some of the rooms, and I hear a buzzing, like a radio or something. Then it hits me. There's probably a contractor here, someone finishing up the drywall or something to that effect. I peek into the master bedroom, and inside I spot a woman. She's dirty, somewhat around 30 or 35, and she's definitely not working on the property. "Excuse me, are you supposed to be in here?" I asked, hoping she was the home buyer's wife or something. "Of course I am. What are you doing in my house?" she replied. I'm the home inspector. I scheduled with her husband and the contractor to do a full walkthrough. I guess I didn't realize anyone would be here." She grumbled and gave me some kind of response, then vanished into the bathroom area. Not all the drywall was up, so I could still see her feet and arms as she shuffled around, continuing to make these weird noises. At this point, I was kind of creeped out and was ready to get the hell out of there. This was well before pocket cell phone, so I was on my own out there, at least until I could get back to my car. I hadn't encountered much in the way of weird at this point in my career, and this lady was about to culture me with a great deal, if you catch my drift. She came back from the bathroom with the biggest kitchen knife that I've ever seen, and planted it right through a piece of hanging drywall. I took a step back out of pure instinct, and did my best to ask her what the hell she was doing. What came out sounded something like, what is it you're doing?" She didn't miss a beat though. "I don't have a husband, so I think you need to leave." I look around the floor. I see the trash for what it really is. Pack rat stuff, food wrappers, tissues, toilet paper. This lady is crazy and homeless, and she's just moved in. By the look of it, she's been crashing here for at least a couple of days. Probably hasn't had a care in the world. Now, the only thing to piss her off is me, and I'm stuck here with her. Alright, simple logic prevails. Time to go. I tuck my clipboard up on a shelf, check my pockets for my car keys, and begin back up towards the exit. "Don't leave your pictures here. They'll want those back at the station," she says, pointing at my clipboard. I shake my head and raise my hands to show them that they're empty, and I keep moving backward. She doesn't like this. She starts breathing weird, like super hard and deep. I take my own deep breath and go back to grab that clipboard. Anything to mediate the mood. This triggers her even worse somehow. This lady starts screaming like a banshee. She takes a run at me, and it scares me so bad that I almost fall backwards. I only caught myself by the threshold of the door, which I can firmly say held my weight. A+ for construction on my inspection so far. Thankfully, she stopped short. Didn't really charge fully at me, but her screaming has created another sound. Something out of place. I turn to find a man, a little older than the girl, shamble out from a closet, or some partially finished nook. He's shirtless, tattooed, and gaunt. Definitely a junkie. "You woke me up," he said. "You shouldn't be here. Why'd you wake me up?" I tried to answer, but what the hell was I gonna say to this guy? I could tell by his look, logic, it wasn't gonna speak to him. Then the woman came back down the hall from where they were standing and had me kinda cornered. "He says my husband sent him," she said. "Threw me right under the bus." Then the guy starts to lose it, flexing, bugging out, hyperventilating, that sort of thing. He starts pressing me about how her husband found them, where he was, and if he was close. Total druggy paranoia. I assured them that I didn't know the guy. I had no business with them. I was just there to simply look over the house. I made a mistake and got the wrong address, and I would be on my way out without any more issues. They'd never see me again. Apparently, at least from what I gleaned, they were on the run from this lady's husband. He was a drug dealer, and they owed him a boatload of cash. They were on their way out of the city on foot, and they spotted the partial build on its own. It became their little cracked-in haven for at least 48 hours. It didn't matter though. They wouldn't let it go. They were beyond convinced that I was a resp for her husband. I'd found them, and now someone needed to make a move. It was by far the scariest standoff that I could imagine, as I wasn't prepared to take on not one, but two agitated crackheads. As they closed in, it occurred to me that the only ace up my sleeve was the crap that they were telling themselves. I had to go with a lie, and the second that I did, they completely changed gears. "Your husband isn't gonna like any of this. You know he's outside, right?" Both of their jaws immediately hit the floor, and then they sprinted over to the window to do what junkies do. Peep through the blinds, work that window like a true crazy person, see what's out there. I proceeded to back through the house until I made some distance, then ran as quick as I could to get back to my car. I was horrified when I looked up to find them chasing me across the front yard. They were much paler and thinner than I first pegged them for inside the house. Out in the sun, they were even creepier. Because of their look, I dropped my keys in the dirt before I could even unlock my car. All I could do was snatch them up and start running again, aiming for the next cluster of new builds. I saw a couple of trucks parked near them earlier, so I was praying to myself a construction crew would be nearby, anyone normal to help me even out the teams. Fortunately for me, I didn't have to run very far, and I stayed well ahead of the junky house dwellers, but they still didn't give up the chase. I spilled into the nearest house, and right there, a crew of 5 guys met me with hammers and saws, asking me what the hell I was up to. It was exactly what I wanted to see. I explained that I was a home inspector, was working next door. Some druggies inside caught me off guard and chased me over here. They gave me the green light, and they went outside to confront the duo on the lawn. It went exactly how you would expect it to. The crack twins started telling some crazy-ass story, and the construction guys snapped them both up and put them on the ground, called the nearest police station. They sat on top of them until the cops arrived, at which point I had to clarify my story a little bit more. The whole thing was absolutely wild, and they got hauled off with their belongings. I said a big thanks to the work team that saved me, even dropped a few gift cards off for them later on that week. There was minimal damage to the house, except for the bathroom that they were hiding out in. It had the craziest graffiti that you could imagine. I swear it looked like it was painted in blood, carved out with a knife, and straight burned into the wood and drywall. It was something out of a movie. All insane devil worship stuff, I think. I've always felt like I got away pretty lucky that day, as they both seemed pretty strung out as I did my walkthrough. Had I caught them when they were more coherent, who knows what could have happened.
In the summer of 2002, I found myself working at one of the gas stations in our town, and more often than not, the owner would put me on the night shift, which I was not fond of, but I needed the job, so there wasn't much to argue about at the time. I did put my foot down after an incident occurred that caused us to call the cops and got us slightly involved in a murder investigation, and after that, I was never put on the night shift again. The problem came at around 11 at night, when I was the only person working in the store, and I saw a man walking down the sidewalk. It looked like he was going to come in and buy something, but to my surprise, he seemed to stop in the parking lot. I watched the man from the window of the gas station as he appeared to be looking around for something. It's hard to describe it, but his movements looked like he was some sort of walking zombie. He was half hunched over, and with every step he took, it almost looked like his arms were twitching. I thought about checking on him and asking if he needed help, but right before I could bring myself to do something, I noticed something that shook me up a bit. What I originally thought was simply a red pattern on his shirt was now glistening under the streetlights, as if it was something that was wet. And the more I looked at it, the more I noticed that his hands and fingers were also covered in this red substance. Right away, I knew something was wrong. And considering that I was alone in the gas station, I decided my best option would be to lock the door. I walked around to the corner and went over to the door to lock it. And just at that moment, the man in the parking lot happened to look over at me. I continued locking the door and bolting the floor lock as the man began to approach the glass. As he got closer, it was clear that he had been covered in blood, some of which was even on his face, but none of it appeared to be coming from him. I reached for my cell phone and began calling the police as the man began to press his face against the glass door. He began slapping his hands against the glass as he yelled in some sort of incoherent language. The police assured me that they were on their way to my location, and I made sure to stand far away from the glass. About 30 seconds before the police arrived, the blood-covered man reached into his pant pocket and pulled out a small pocket knife. My eyes widened as he began to fold open the blade and then press the tip of it against the glass. The man began to let out a sinister laugh, and it looked like he was getting ready to wind up his arm and smash the glass door once and for all. Lucky for me, the police ended up pulling into the parking lot before he could do so. The man turned and faced the 2 cars that pulled up, and they were immediately at a standoff. Thankfully, the police managed to tase the man before he could hurt anyone and arrest him. But get this, things got even more serious the next day when the police came in to question me about what happened. It turns out before coming to the gas station, the man had taken some sort of drug that made him very belligerent. He then proceeded to murder his girlfriend and her older brother in the apartment before walking down the road. He told the police that he had been possessed by demons and that his god told him that he would find more at the gas station. I don't know what was going through his head. All I know is I've never been so terrified in my entire life.
I always considered myself to be a low-risk type of person. I never really had gotten into any super dangerous or life-threatening situation. But that changed 4 summers ago. You'll believe me by the end of the story when I tell you that this experience changed my life forever. We were just let out on break by our school, and my friends were eager to go and do something stupid as usual. I was the responsible one of the group, if you will. It was honestly quite surprising that I even hung out with these adrenaline junkies. I was never a risk taker. I would always consider the consequences to my action before I took them. Many times, I was the balancing factor to my friends' crazy antics. Despite this, I loved hanging out with them. The dynamic of them encouraging me to try new things and push me out of my comfort zone was something I never really could find in other people. But when I turned 18, peer pressure started skyrocketing. I felt like I was somehow missing out on something, that I was living my early years of life in fear. This, combined with the people I was hanging out with, brought me to make some really irrational decisions. Whether that be shoplifting or driving with them at incredibly high speeds, I caught myself constantly trying out new, irresponsible decisions. This tolerance towards doing stupid things is what I largely blame for what happened to me. Summertime hit and the temperature was starting to skyrocket. While most teenagers went to a friend or neighbor's pool to swim, we wanted to try something a little different. There was a nearby water reserve which was strictly prohibited to swim in. During the daytime, security patrolled the area and made sure no one jumped in that water. But at nighttime, it was open to anyone brave enough to swim among the various dangerous fish over there. My friends wanted to go there and take a dip with me, cool off during the hot Korean night. Rumor had it that the lake was haunted and that a lot of sketchy things have happened there. This, of course, only strengthened our urge to go there and take a swim late at night. Of course, I was hesitant at first, but as peer pressure crept in, I went along with it. We arrived at the lake around midnight. We were already in our swimsuits. There were some lights around the complex, but the lake was pitch dark. It was impossible to see where you were even swimming or standing or how deep the water was. Any of the said large marine life in the lake were going to be impossible to spot. This really frightened me. Sure, I was opening up to taking new risks, but this was really pushing that as well. After a lot of convincing from my friends, we all headed to the lake. One of my friends guided us through the shrubs. We used a large pocket knife to cut down the leaves and somehow make our way through the fence. When we got to the lake, I reluctantly got in. It really wasn't that bad at first. The water was quite nice and it was a lot of fun swimming in the dark with my friends. We kept swimming around for about 15 minutes while cracking jokes and making fun of each other. But as we were swimming, I noticed something, specifically someone out in the distance. I saw a mystic white figure out in the distance. It quickly faded away in the water. I shrugged it off as maybe just some light reflecting and kept swimming. Eventually, my friends wanted to do a dare and see who would go out farthest in the lake at night. Not being in my best decision-making mindset, I agreed, but I made sure to stay relatively close to the shore and grab onto a small concrete wall. Something deep inside me still felt off about the whole idea, but I went through with it. We all swam as far as we could. Several of my friends stopped halfway. The water was several meters deep at this point. At that point, it was just me and 2 of my other friends in the lake. We started swimming back, but as I was heading back, I noticed something under the water. It seemed to be a person under there. I looked closer at what it could possibly be and felt a tugging on my foot. I tried to look around and see what was happening, but the tugging just got harder and harder. I tried to wriggle out and see what could be doing this. Was I stuck on something? Why was it pulling me downwards? At this point, I was screaming and panicking. My friends noticed and started quickly swimming towards me. I tried grabbing at my feet, but something pushed my hands away. At this point, my head was completely under the water. I was losing oxygen, and I was losing it fast. My life was flashing before me. confusion and fear running through my mind, adrenaline pumping through my veins. I tried to make sense of the situation, but I couldn't. There was no way this was some large fish or lake shark. It felt like a human arm was pulling at my ankle downwards. My friends were trying to pull me up towards the surface, but it was no use. I even felt some of my friends trying to kick down or thrash at whatever was pulling me down, but even that didn't work. Eventually, I felt a sharp pain at my foot and started to black out. Still confused as to who or what was trying to drown me. I woke up at the hospital a day later, completely unaware of my surroundings. Part of me wanted to believe that this was some sort of bad dream. As I started to panic and try and leave the bed, a nurse and doctor walked in along with some of my friends and they calmed me down. They explained to me everything that happened. I asked them what was pulling me down in the lake and they didn't have a clear answer. The doctors and nurses said it was most likely some sort of lake shark or predatory fish. Apparently they can get very large and extremely heavy and are certainly powerful enough to yank down a person of my size. But that's when I asked them, how exactly did they get me out of the water? The nurse looked down at my foot and that's when I noticed it. Most of my foot was removed. All of my toes were gone and the side of my foot was mutilated. I turned pale. I couldn't believe it. I didn't want to see it. The nurse explained to me that my friends had to use the large pocket knife they had on hand and cut a large part of my foot off in order to save me. She said I would most likely have died if they didn't do so, as those fish don't tend to let go of their jaws. I was devastated and in complete disbelief. A few days later, my friends checked in on me to see how I was doing. We eventually discussed what happened. My friend explained to me that when they rushed towards me, they saw what seemed to be a human hand pulling me down in the water. They tried pulling me, but the arm was just too powerful. They even tried hitting at it or cutting it, but it didn't seem to work. As a last resort, they had to amputate part of my foot. They explained to me the legend of the Mi-Ghosta. As per Korean legend, vengeful spirits that were taken from this world too early often sought violent actions against unsuspecting victims. The lake we were swimming at was apparently a common spot for the mafia to execute people and dump their bodies too. They often lurk where their bodies are left and try and subject people to the same form of death. In the case of a water ghost, they drag you down and never let go. This explained everything. The person I saw in the distance, the ghostly silhouette in the water, the feeling of the human hand on my ankle. My friends tried to explain to the police and doctors that this was some sort of paranormal activity and that it didn't look like a fish at all. But the emergency services obviously did not believe us. As indicated by the signs around the lake, this area was known for large and aggressive marine life, and to them that was the most reasonable explanation. After all, why would they believe a group of trespassing teenagers? Currently, I walk with a prosthetic. I still get nightmares about what happened that night. My foot is a painful reminder every day of what happened to me and how I could have avoided it. We should never have gone in there in the first place. To this day, I still do believe that I was attacked by some sort of paranormal being, and that night will haunt me till the day I die. I'm an American.
Hi, my name is Trevor, and this is by far the scariest thing that has ever happened to me. This happened in May of this year. I'm a 22-year-old male who's in pretty good shape, and I'm a first responder, so I've seen and dealt with pretty much everything. I live with my parents in an upper-middle-class community. The town I live in has very little to no crime in it. So here's my story. My parents left to go to Florida to visit some family, and basically left me and my German Shepherd dog alone for the week. A quick layout of the house. It's 2 stories, with my parents' room on the first floor. Anyways, it's night out, and I'm sleeping in my parents' room with my dog. The bed is between 2 windows with screens on them. They were both opened. It's about 2 a.m. and I'm just getting ready to fall asleep when I wake up to the sounds of screaming. I think nothing of it since there's a lot of kids in the area who are always out. But about 10 minutes later, I hear the same screaming again, which woke my dog up, and he was also alerted. I still think nothing of it. Another 10 minutes, the screaming happens again, and I noticed it wasn't a child scream, and it was only one person. It was a loud screaming, sounded like someone was getting stabbed. My dog starts huffing and totally freaking out.
I'm now scared shitless and unable to move. 5 minutes later, and the screaming was right outside the window. It was so loud this time that my ears started ringing. My dog flips absolute shit, and I'm having a panic attack. I look out the window, and I see some old woman with long gray hair, and she was still screaming. I finally jump into action, and I grab my dad's pistol. The only bad thing is that it was a revolver, and it had no bullets, so I had to pray she thought it was loaded. I went back to the window, and now she was gone. I dialed 911, and as soon as the operator answered, I then heard the front door glass break. I ran over, and I see this old woman reaching into the window trying to unlock it. The scariest part of all of this was that her arm was rubbing right against the broken glass, cutting her very deep, but she wasn't even reacting to it. She was giving me the 1,000-yard stare while laughing and screaming. I'm literally crying at this point, and I had pointed the gun right at her. She sees the gun, and then just starts yelling.
Do it! I dare you!
And as much as I wanted to, I couldn't since I had no bullets. And then suddenly, I then see lights going down my street. The woman pulls her arm away and starts walking back slowly while still staring at me and laughing. I can then hear the cops yelling, "Drop the knife, ma'am!" The cops took my statement, and I later found out that she was actually a psych patient who had escaped the hospital, and that she even broke into a trailer nearby and stabbed a couple. The last I heard, they were okay, but why my house out of all the others? I had my door fixed and all the blood cleaned up. My parents later called me because they had heard that there was a break-in in the area. I had to tell them it was our house, but to not worry. To that crazy old who tried stabbing me, I hope you're getting the proper care and help that you need.
When I was in my mid to late 20s, my boyfriend and I took a trip down to St. Augustine, Florida. We both really loved it there due to the antique aesthetic and the rich history behind it all. And with it being the oldest city in America, it couldn't get any better. We stayed at this really nice hotel and walked around the city, exploring the nice museums and just getting away from the modern civilization we're all familiar with. One day in the afternoon, maybe on our second or third day there, we're both in our hotel room when my boyfriend says that he's gonna go to the pool to take a swim. I tell him to go do his thing while I stayed behind to work on a project for my internship. Looking back, I really wish I had gone with him. About an hour into my internship, I take a break and decide to take a nap as this project really sucked the life out of me. I'd also made sure my boyfriend knew that I'd be asleep so that he wouldn't come in to wake me up. Long story short, I fall asleep for a good hour or so when I for some reason wake up. I still couldn't figure out as to why I suddenly woke up, but it was kind of like one of those moments where you just awake from a really bad dream or REM sleep. At that point, I get up when I thought I could hear what sounded like breathing coming from somewhere in the room. It was faint, but it sounded echoey to the point where I could hear it clearly. I knew it couldn't have been the AC as we had turned it off the previous night. This made me easily paranoid as I didn't know what it was or where it was coming from, and I was definitely not going to go looking for it. So I did the only thing anyone would do. I left the room and got the attention of security from down the hall. I went on to explain that I had heard breathing and didn't know where it was coming from. Security thankfully inspected the room, as well as my boyfriend who had finally come back. However, to my surprise, they had found no one else in the room and couldn't find out what it was. My boyfriend and I just assumed it had to be the AC because apparently earlier that day, he had overheard someone say it had been broken throughout the building. That night we get into bed and go to sleep when a few hours later my boyfriend wakes me up. At first I wasn't sure what he wanted, but that's when I hear the breathing noises again. The same noises I had heard earlier. This time I knew my mind wasn't playing tricks on me as I was fully awake. The breathing was a lot louder than before, and that's when my boyfriend pointed to one place that we never checked. The air vent. I watch as my boyfriend goes with his phone to the vent and shines his light inside when he falls back, letting out a scream. For a brief second, I could see a face inside the vent. At that point, we run out of that room, getting the attention of hotel management. The manager, being the nice person he was, called the police, where they then inspected the whole room and took a look at the vent in the wall. Turns out, inside of the closet was a cutout of a small door frame that led into the walls. This made it easy for someone to crawl through and to place the cutout back behind them. Upon finding this, police were able to get through and arrest a man who happened to be the hotel's receptionist. He had been doing this for months, which also meant that he had been watching people change, including me. He was arrested, of course, and the hotel gave us a full refund for our stay, which was a way of pleading for us not to sue them. However, we were decent people and knew it wasn't their fault. Because of this, my boyfriend and I never go to hotels anymore and have stuck with Airbnbs instead. I know, probably not the best idea either, but better than hotels by a landslide. The scariest thing about this was that police had found various photos taken of different people sleeping in the hotel beds inside his house. Thankfully, they didn't seem to find any of me or my boyfriend, but I felt so bad for the people who don't even know. Up until now, I'm always cautious about hidden cameras or rooms in our house. It even came to a point where I'd always check behind the shower curtain, thinking there would be someone there, and the one time you didn't check, someone would be there. Nothing has happened since, but my paranoia always gets the better of me. Anyway, that's our story, and I hope it makes others aware of who could be watching without your knowledge.
I moved into a new apartment last fall. The apartment was, for the most part, pretty average. I had a one-bedroom on the first floor. It was a corner unit, which was nice. I had a bedroom, bathroom, living room, and kitchen. I was moving into a new state for work, and had lived about 2 hours away. When I got to the place, it took me a whole day to move all of my furniture in, but I was able to do it with the help of a coworker. That night, though, something kind of weird happened. I was up pretty late because it was a weekend, and after moving in all of my stuff, I was staying up late by myself watching a movie. At about midnight, I heard a noise coming from outside my door leading to the hallway. It was a man's voice, and it sounded like he was saying, "Jane." He was seemingly calling out for somebody named Jane. At first, I was sort of creeped out. Then, I thought maybe it was just somebody walking down the hall, or one of my neighbors going to their places. I paused the TV and got up, taking a couple of more steps closer to the door. I still heard the man's voice, and I could tell now that it was coming from right outside of my door, and he wasn't moving. Whoever was here must either be one of my neighbors or somebody looking for whoever used to live in my apartment. That's what I was thinking, and whoever did live in my apartment before must have been named Jane. I decided to go out and let this guy know that Jane doesn't live here anymore, and I just moved in. I walked over to the door and opened it. But as I was opening the door, I heard footsteps darting away as if the man was sprinting back down the hallway. When I had opened up the door, I could see down the hallway that the man was gone, but I did just barely see him disappearing around the corner. Why would he try to run away from me? I thought this was pretty strange, but what else could I do? So I went back inside and unpaused my movie. Fast forward to about a week after that. This time, I was in bed sleeping, but was awoken in the middle of the night by a noise. My room was all dark, and it was completely silent, except for a voice. Once again, I heard someone calling out, "Jane." This guy again? What did he want, and who was he? More importantly, where was he? He wasn't outside my door again, or I wouldn't have been able to hear him. It took me a second because I had just woken up, but I realized that whoever it was right outside my bedroom window. I sat up in bed and looked out the window. I saw some guy disappearing out of my view again. I never got a good look at him at all. Now I was really creeped out. This must be some type of mistake. I stayed up, wide awake. I got up and went into my kitchen to get some water. When I was there, I heard another noise coming from the bedroom window. It was like a scratching noise, sort of. I went back into my bedroom, just in time to see that the guy was there again. I saw his face for a good second, and he saw mine. It looked as though maybe he was trying to break in. When he saw me, he stopped, and then ran away again. From what I saw, he was either bald or had really short hair, and was sort of short and stocky. I stayed up, not sure what to do. The guy seemed to be gone now, but I didn't know if he would come back. I stayed up basically for the entire rest of the night. The man never returned though. The next day, I contacted my apartment and told them about it, and then I went to the police. I was told they would patrol the area. However, the man never did come back. I still wonder who it was. Part of me thinks this guy was stalking a woman named Jane, who he thought lived there. Either that, or maybe the guy was crazy, or maybe he was stalking me. I really don't know what to make of it.
It was the second security job that I had ever had, and at first I was loving it. The job was to work the night shift in an apartment building that was currently in the process of being renovated by new owners. The reason they hired security was to make sure that no one was squatting in any of the empty, rundown apartments. And if I'm being honest, it was really a simple job. My shift typically started around 9 p.m., and I would work with one other security guard. We would take turns walking each of the floors and making sure that all the doors were secure. But other than that, we practically got paid to spend most of our night just hanging out in the lobby and watching the few cameras that were laid out around the building, most of which were focused on the doors leading in and out. For the most part, it was really simple and relaxing, but there was a few incidents that put both me and my coworker Sam on edge. It all started when Sam came back from her walkthrough of floor 5 one night, and she told me that she could have sworn she heard someone walking around the halls, but when she checked, she saw nothing. After that, almost every walkthrough we did, one of us could swear that we heard things, whether it be walking, creaking, or sometimes even the sound of something banging against the wall of a room. Anytime we checked it out, there was no one to be found. We started to joke with one another about the building being haunted, but that was just to lighten the mood after anything creepy happened. It wasn't until about 2 weeks after we started hearing noises that I had confirmation that someone was in the building with us, and it was just my luck that it happened on the one day that month that Sam had taken off of work. I began doing my first walk through the building that day, and as soon as I got into the stairwell, something in the back of my head told me that I wasn't alone. But I figured I was just jittery after all the noises that were happening, and since I had been alone, I was just a little bit more on edge. I made my way through the first, second, and third floors without any incident. However, as soon as I began making my way through the dimly lit hallway of the 4th floor, I began to hear footsteps. I kept looking over my shoulder as it sounded as if the steps were coming from behind me, but every time there was nothing there. I made sure to check every room on the floor thoroughly, and to my surprise, there was still nothing to be found. I tried my best to put the noises in the back of my mind and continued on with my walkthrough. I made it back down to the lobby and began relaxing when I practically fell right out of my chair. I had been looking at the screen on my desk, and I thought I had seen movement out of the corner of my eye near the stairwell. And sure enough, as soon as I looked up, I could see what was clearly an adult male staring at me through the doorway of the staircase. I jumped backward in my seat, knocking myself over, and practically fell right onto the ground. I scrambled to get back to my feet, but by the time I looked back at the stairwell, that man was gone. I took off after him, and I could have sworn that I heard him running up the stairs and then through the door onto the 4th floor. But by the time I had gotten there, the man was nowhere to be found. I called the police, and they did a thorough search of the building but came up empty-handed. Honestly, for a minute I felt like I must have been seeing things, but I know for a fact that there was someone else in the apartment building with me that day. And for the next week or so, Sam and I made sure to run our walkthroughs together so that we always had backup. But to our surprise, there weren't any signs of the man that I had seen, and the strange noises had also seemed to stop, at least for a little while. It was only around 9 days after the first sighting that Sam and I ended up having another incident. The two of us just started our shift, and we were getting ready to do our first walkthrough, when all of a sudden, we heard what sounded like someone yelling coming from upstairs. Now, it didn't sound like screams coming from someone in pain, but instead sounded like someone yelling very aggressively. The two of us looked at each other, and then we grabbed our radio and cell phones before going to check it out. Sure enough, the yelling that we heard was coming from the 4th floor, the same floor that I had followed the man onto the first time that I had seen him. Sam and I made sure to be careful as we stepped into the hallway since it was very poorly lit, and we didn't know what to expect. And sure enough, as soon as we walked out of the staircase, the yelling ceased. Sam and I both listened closely in hopes to finding out where the yelling had been coming from, and both of us nearly turned around and ran back down the stairs when the man began yelling at us directly. "You won't take me home," he began to yell. "Neither of you." Sam and I looked at each other before I responded. "Sir, we aren't here to hurt you. Please come out so we can talk." We waited for a moment, but there was no response. There was no verbal response. But Sam tapped me on the shoulder before pointing to one of the rooms on the left of the hallway. We could clearly see the door beginning to crack open before something flew out of it toward us. I heard the sound of something small hitting the wall next to me, and when I looked on the floor, I saw what looked like a small dart of sorts. Sam and I didn't say anything to each other before we both took off running down the staircase. It wasn't long before Sam was on the phone with the police station again, and they had units heading our way. This time, when they got there, I decided to wait in the stairway for them to make sure that the man hadn't had a chance to escape. And Sam was watching the cameras and all of the exits. As far as we knew, the man was still on the 4th floor. The police arrived and they made their way up to the floor and headed straight for the room that we had seen the dart fly out of. This time, the man made no attempt to hide or escape. As soon as the police knocked on the door of the room, he opened it and turned himself in. The police officer that Sam and I spoke to seemed very concerned for our safety and asked us if either of us had ever met this man before. We both said no, and when we asked why, the officer informed us that the man was likely going to lure us both into the room he had been hiding in to kill us. They found multiple knives in the room with him alongside multiple large garbage bags and 3 plastic tarps. That wasn't all though. On this person, the officer said they found a tranquilizer gun along with 3 darts that had been laced with a strong sedative. To this day, we still don't know why we would have been targeted.
My sister and I have never been on a holiday together, just the two of us. We went several times with our mom together. My parents are divorced, but my mother was the stressful kind of holiday planner. Cultural tours here, a day-long bus trip there, and back on the plane we are again. So we decided to book a 5-day trip to a place we'd never been to. The both of us never can stand being at a place for more than a week. It just gets boring and we are restless adventurers. We traveled with Airbnb for the first time, and the place was amazing. It was on the top floor of the building with a huge balcony from which you could look down on the intersection till the end of each street. One street led directly to the port. If you followed it down past tennis courts and some parking lots from hotels around a curve. My sister and I always went out for dinner. The seafood was great, and as the days passed, we explored further and further away from our apartment for new restaurants. On the last day, we found a place that served sea urchin, which was about 45 minutes away from home. Greek people are so friendly. When you eat lunch or dinner, dessert is always free, and they set you up with raki, a very strong, and for me as an inexperienced drinker, painful, little brandy that packs a punch if you finish it quickly. This being the 5th day already, I couldn't stand drinking more than 1 shot glass, so I left the rest of the small bottle to my sister. She said it would be rude to leave a gift. she can also handle a lot more alcohol than me. We left the place stuffed and with satisfied thirst, walking along the port home to our place. The streets are always full of tourists, but only until the curve I mentioned before. Once you reach the tennis courts, there are about 200 meters upstreet to the intersection where our house is. What we didn't expect were that a group of gypsies set up their night camp on the parking lots in the light of the tennis court. If you are not aware of the situation, Greece is overall a landing port for refugees and gypsies, although we didn't see many of them around Heraklion. I felt uneasy because we were the only two girls in the street, besides the group of people getting ready to sleep. My sister was a little happy from the alcohol when I suddenly heard shuffling steps behind me. I could see the shadow of a skinny but tall man. I listened closely to his steps. He was still far enough away from me so that he couldn't suddenly grab me, but I felt very uneasy, as I was wearing high platforms and directing my sister in front of me. He starts picking up the pace, clearly trying to adjust his walking to our pace. "Hey, hi." I don't answer him. He comes up to my right. "Hi." I size him up, skinny but muscular. There is something wrong with his leg. His hip seems to be limping. Nope, not the kind of person I'd like to talk to in the middle of the night. My sister asks me, "Who is that?" I don't know, keep walking. He passes me and tries to speak to my sister, maybe thinking she would be easier to convince because she looks drunkish. He starts speaking in a foreign language, which we obviously don't speak. She sheepishly tells him, "What? English. We only speak English." I run up to my sister and pull her with me onto the street. "Don't talk to him, keep moving." That's when he tries to grab her by the arm and pull her back. I'm tense at this moment. With a face of "Don't you touch my sister," I step up to the guy and shove him with my hands in the chest and shout at him, "No!" Because of his limp, he stumbles backwards. I keep looking at him when I take the hand of my sister and walk faster. That's when he starts grinning. Finally we reach the intersection and run into the house. The front door is always open, so I hurriedly get my sister into the elevator into the 3rd floor. My sister is clearly shaken up from the guy trying to grab her, but rather angry than scared. We lock the door and leave the lights out. From the balcony we can see the guy walking into the entrance of our house, in and out for at least an hour before he finally left.
In 2017, I'd heard news of people dressing up as clowns and running around with knives at night. Typically, I brush those things off because I have my own set of problems. I, a 20-year-old female, was often up all hours of the night dealing with my screaming newborn. It was January or February, so we still had some snow. I wasn't able to get out of the house often. Taking out the trash, which is located right next to my back door, was usually the most I got out of fresh air. One morning, I took out the trash and happened to glance over to the right. Noticed footprints directly under the window to my baby's room. I walked over to inspect it, and not only were there footprints, but there were also hand indentations on the window screen. Weird, but the baby slept in my room, so I wasn't very confused at the moment. But my boyfriend was losing his marbles. Fast forward a couple of days, I was up all alone around 3 a.m. and heard not exactly what I would call screaming, but more of a screeching howl. We have lots of stray cats, so I assumed that's what it was and I just ignored it. Once the sun was up, I looked out the window and noticed a few new sets of footprints that really didn't make sense, because it looked like someone had just been passing in between the houses, but again, I blew it off because we had a lot of drug houses across the street. And people cross our yard before they get to their house all the time. Maybe around 4 nights later, again around 3 a.m., I'm feeding my newborn. I hear a dragging noise against the house. And from where I was sitting on the couch, I could see the back door. The back door has a window with blinds on it, and it doesn't seal very well due to the wood rot on the frame. I paused the TV and listened just to see if I could hear it again. Now directly at the back door. Looking over, I can clearly see a looming figure just standing in the window, holding one of those big kitchen knives. The blinds were shut, so I'm just seeing this creepy shadow version of all this. He runs the knife across the window panes before softly knocking. Meanwhile, I'm trying to figure out what to do with the newborn latched on, because my phone is up in the bedroom, and something in me just doesn't want whoever this is out of my vision. I stand up and readjust because I really didn't want a screaming baby right then. And walking into my kitchen, I flick on the light and said, "Hey man, I already called the police, and I'm sure you don't want to deal with them, so why don't you go home?" I really don't know why I talked to him so calmly and normal-like, but I don't think he was expecting anyone to say anything because he just froze. It seemed like he was talking to himself over about it, seeing if it was worth it. Then a few seconds later, he darted off down the alleyway. Never had anything like that happen again, but my boyfriend sure was mad I didn't wake him up to handle the situation, or at least actually call the police. I'm not sure if this qualifies as a creepy encounter, but I sure was creeped out once my sleep-deprived self realized what happened, and more importantly, what could have happened.